الحمد لله نستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلله فلا هادي له ونشهد أن لا إله إلا الله ونشهد أن سيدنا مولانا محمد عبده ورسوله صلى الله تعالى آله وأصحابه وسلم تسليما كثيرا كثيرا. سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. ربي اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to our Balagh Academy webinar on Islamic finance, Islamic mortgages, business loans, and all the sort of associated topics that relate to these essential topics, especially now, since we're going through a challenging period with COVID around the world with the current pandemic. So what I've got for you today, inshallah, are some very special guests. There's some very familiar faces, familiar names. And before I begin, I'm just going to briefly just introduce them all so that you have a bit of an understanding about who they all are. So first of all, let's begin with Mufti Zubair. So Mufti Zubair is the chair of Al-Qalam UK. He's somebody that any of the Al-Balagh students would be very familiar with. He's one of our instructors, and also has been present on many different platforms on issues related to the Sharia. Next, we have Mufti Barakatulla, Mufti Barakatulla Qasmi, who's the Sharia advisor of Al Rayan Bank UK, and he's also the advisor on many other organizations and financial institutes around UK, and he has a wealth of experience in some of these areas. So he's a quite known figure in association with a number of different financial institutes. Then we have Mufti Faraz Adam. Mufti Faraz Adam is the Executive Director of Amana Advisors UK, and also he plays quite an important role in many different types of articles and writings on a number of different subjects related to cryptocurrency and various other sort of associated topics. And then finally, we have Mufti Abdullah Nana, who's a co-author, and he is a co-founder of American Fiqh Academy in the US. So he's recognized for a number of contributions that he's made on a number of different subjects, one of them being Islamic finance. So alhamdulillah, it's very good to have somebody from across the ocean, inshallah, present on today's webinar. Now, we've got a very limited time. So inshallah, in the little time that we have, we need to sort of get straight to the point. So inshallah, what we're going to try to do is I'm going to ask a couple of questions and we'll have a little discussion amongst all of us. And what we'll do then, inshallah, gradually is we will then open up the panel to questions from yourselves. And I'm sure many of you have many questions that you would like to ask our expert panel. So first of all, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start first with a typical question, which always comes up in these kind of discussions when we talk about Islamic mortgages. So I'm going to make reference to Mufti Zubair first. So Mufti Zubair, in terms of Islamic finance mortgages in particular, so we've got the conventional mortgages that exist in the current banking system at the present moment. And we have some ulama who do give some level of permissibility in using mortgages from conventional banks and financial institutes. What is the general take on that? Is that something that is considered acceptable? Is there a difference of opinion on that issue? How should we perceive that?
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد الرسل وخاتم النبيين محمد وآله وصحبه أجمعين ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين أما بعد. First of all, جزاكم الله خيرا وأحسن الجزاء for inviting me onto this panel of esteemed scholars. MashaAllah, quite a heavy presence we have today. And with regards to the question you pose, and this is something that is promoted by a large number of scholars generally, is that interest-based mortgages in the West, interest-based mortgages in the West are permissible for Muslims to take up, provided it is for their one residential property. So this is a common position that you find amongst ulama, that the need for covering our heads is something that is an essential need, and so therefore, to fulfill that need, if you allow, it is permitted to take out a conventional mortgage. And the basis of this is premised on two founding, basic principles. One is the position of Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah, where he says that between a Muslim and a non-Muslim in al-harb there is no riba. And secondly, it's on the basis of necessity, that because there's a need and heightened need, and so therefore sometimes that needs reach the level of darura, and that allows taking of a conventional mortgage. Now, this is a position that something that I think in America as well, and in across Europe, the European Council for Fatwa and Research, Al-Majlis Al-Awrubi Lil-Iftai wal-Buhuth, they have presented. Although specifically with the European Council for Fatwa and Research, they gave a number of conditions, and and permission comes after almost everything else is exhausted, and then they have given permission. However, that position is not something that other ulama like myself and Shaykh Mufti Uthmani as well have never considered that position to be valid. In relation to the UK, well, firstly, the premise is that this is based on firstly that position of Imam Hanifa rahmatullahi alayhi. Well, first of all, his position is based on when you are basically at war with the enemy, then everything that they have is fair game, and so therefore, if you enter their country.
Okay, just on the basis of what you're saying, so you mentioned a couple of things there, I suppose. One is the concept of darura, necessity. Then I think you talked about the sort of the principle related to Dar al-Harb, so this being a non-Muslim country. So these were sort of some of the pivotal sort of issues of debate and questioning. I can see that Mufti Zubair is, the connection is probably not there. So I'm just going to move on to one of the other panelists. So Mufti Barakatulla, is Mufti Barakatulla here? I don't see him. Oh, Mufti Barakatulla? No, okay. So Mufti Abdullah Nana, what are your thoughts? I mean, what's the certain perception that we're getting in the US, for example, on this issue? Mufti Abdullah Nana, I don't think we're getting your voice here. You seem to be muted. Let me just ask you to unmute. No, okay. Right, so we're left down with Mufti Faraz. MashaAllah. So what's the general overview of that then, from what your understanding is related to this topic?
I mean, I'm happy to hold the baton while the seniors are sorting the mics out. No, so I mean, the first premise, and I totally agree with Mufti Zubair what he's mentioned.
Right.
Can I just finish then? While
go ahead. I'll pass it back.
Okay, we'll give you the opportunity in that case.
For some reason, my connection dropped. Although it's supposed to be 500 megabytes, I don't know.
I did pick on two things though. One is this issue related to, okay, we accept the idea of
let me just conclude that
necessity as well.
Yeah, and so for me, because for me, whether this for us is Dar al-Harb is very questionable.
Yeah.
Because we are here not as people from outside, we are as much as equal citizens as anyone else. And so for me, the wealth of the Muslims over here is protected anyway. But even leaving aside that discussion, what I would say is that where it is permitted, it is receiving the riba, not giving the riba. So that doesn't apply anyway. Secondly is the issue of need. And that need reaching an elevated status so as to allow conventional mortgages. Well, first of all, there are other options that you can, the need, is there a need to cover your head, or is the need to be able to purchase property? The need is to cover the head. And that can be fulfilled through rental, it can be fulfilled through other means, or moving to an area that has cheaper rentals. So for me, both of these don't apply. So I have never, and our ulama have, from the Deobandi school generally, including Mufti Uthmani, have never allowed the conventional mortgages.
So the general summary of that is that we do have ulama around the world who have basically, in the Western world in particular as well, who basically say there is an element of rukhsa, there is this concession on the basis of necessity. And we all recognize there are certain conditions for us to accept the rule of necessity. And your claim there is that there are other alternative options which will fulfill that particular need. For example, rental accommodation and so forth. So this is more an economical sort of discussion as well, I suppose, because then the question arises that can Muslims own property on that basis? And chances are there'll only be an elite group of people who have the finances generally will be able to earn property. So overall, would that not be an issue of hardship for Muslims just generally, because there will be people as minority in a non-Muslim country, but the only thing, majority of them would just be renting accommodation, so are not actually owning properties. Is that something that ever comes into the equation in that discussion?
I imagine that is a consideration for some, but however, what you have to understand is the prohibition of riba, how strong that is, and the license to actually, take up something like this has to be quite high. The bar has to be quite high, and you have to. And what are you trying to achieve? Here, you've moved from needing to cover your head to now, okay, actually, we want to prosper as a Muslim society, and and sort of own property, etc. Now the discussion is different. So it is. So now it's not a necessity as such. And again, there are the alternatives.
Okay, Mufti Abdullah Nana, what's the situation in the US? What's it like there? What's the certain perception of, number one, the Muslim scholars there, and also in terms of the public take-up of that fatwa, of those fatawa?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Nahmadu sallallahu alayhi wa kareem. Amma ba'd. I'd like to, first of all, thank Balagh Academy and the respected ulama for inviting me and for giving me an opportunity here to share the condition here in the United States of America. So adding to what Mufti Zubair has been saying, I think another important thing for us to consider is we can only go to darura and cases of extreme necessity when there's no halal option available. Right? So there's also some assumptions. I think it's important, all the fatwas that have been given on allowing conventional mortgages either in Europe or in the United States or in other countries, we need to factor in, number one, are there any other halal options available in that country besides renting? So here Mufti Zubair has been focusing, mentioning renting, mentioning cheaper housing, governmental housing, etc. But also within our countries, we have Islamic finance options. And the fact that these Islamic finance options also exist, yes, some of them are more reliable than others. Some of them have been approved by the ulama. But when you have a halal option, the need or the justification for going towards conventional loans and conventional financing is not valid. And alhamdulillah, by the grace of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, here in the United States of America, if you were to look at our solution when I was growing up about 20 years ago, in 20 years ago, there was really no Islamic finance or Islamic options available at all. By the grace of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, during the last 20 years, we do have about 10 options, depending on which state you live in, depending on which area you are in the United States of America. But they are anywhere from 5 to 10 options available. Yes, some of them are more reliable than others. Yes, some of them are not approved by the ulama, some of them are. But at the same time, this halal option exists. And the point is, if we encourage these halal options, and these halal options do exist, we should consider them first before considering conventional mortgages and before considering that option.
Okay, so we recognize the idea of the sort of the threshold of darura and necessity, okay, and we also recognize the idea that there are clear alternatives. So let's just look at some of these alternatives. We talked about rental accommodation, but there is some question about the economical situation of Muslims overall over time, how that would impact, but that's another discussion. But in terms of some of these alternatives, I mean, Mufti Barakatulla is not actually with us today. Maybe he might join us later on, but we've got banks like Al-Rayan Bank in the UK, and there are other Islamic banks here that provide Islamic home purchase plans. Okay, and these are systems in place or processes that we have that avoid the concept of riba, of usury and interest. So you mentioned alternative financial packages like this in the USA. Now, I can't avoid this discussion without getting a bit technical. So what kind of financial packages are you referring to here? Because any kind of system which gives you out a loan, what is the process here that would allow that particular process for the financial institutes to benefit to some degree, or even to be sustainable, and at the same time for somebody to avoid paying riba? Mufti Abdullah Nana.
Sorry, if you can repeat that question, just having some...
okay, so the question here is related to some of these financial institutes that you made reference to. What is it that assures you that they are halal?
Yes.
Because they benefit, don't they? They would need to benefit to be sustainable.
Yeah. So I will give a disclaimer. Number one is that each country is different. Here I'm speaking about the American context. And also as a disclaimer, I do work with, we want to make our conflicts of interest or disclaimer clear. I do work with one of the companies here in the United States of America, known as University Islamic Financial. So just making that very clear, I do have ties with a certain organization. At the same time, we do have a number of options here in the United States of America, including possibly the only home financing option in America that's been approved directly by Mufti Taqi Usmani. Right? So we do have some models. MashaAllah, I've spoken to the ulama about some of those models. I've looked at the paperwork. I've looked at the documentation. So there are a number of factors that for the public to determine whether or not a model is halal or not, or is Sharia compliant or not. One of the main things is the presence of a Sharia advisory board and a group of expert ulama who specialize in Islamic finance and the Islamic transactions, who have reviewed these models and who have approved of these models. Not every person knows the legal jargon or the technical terms involved in Islamic finance, but by looking for a reliable Sharia advisory board who has expertise, who's developed this model, makes a big difference. So for the public, that's what I would recommend to look for when a Islamic home financing option does not have a Sharia advisory board, or tells you make your own decision, or does not interact with the ulama, or has not been approved by the ulama. These are all red flags. These are also things to consider. And the fact that there is a Sharia advisory board, at least a group of 3 ulama that meets the AOFI standards, which is, mashallah, the international gold standard in Islamic finance, and who have gone through the paperwork, who review the model, who sign off on the model, and who ensure that all the transactions and all aspects of that home financing model meet the Islamic requirements. Right. So in the فَاسْأَلُوا أَهْلَ الذِّكْرِ إِن كُنتُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ, in the absence of the public not being able to determine this information on their own, relying on a group of Sharia advisory scholars to give a ruling and to approve of a model is the best approach.
Now, I appreciate that you're sort of avoiding going into technicalities, which is fine, alhamdulillah. And we recognize, we've got Mufti Barakatulla, mashallah. So what we're going to do is, Mufti Nana, you've sort of, Abdullah Nana, you've basically explained to us that there are certain financial packages that do exist, and sort of namely, ijara, murabaha, etc. Yeah. So there are certain processes that would allow, from the Islamic sort of perspective, for us to actually engage with this process of giving out some kind of financial loans to individuals. Okay. Now, Mufti Barakatullah, I know you just joined us a bit late, so I've already introduced you, so people are aware that you're the chair of Al Rayan. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
So, Mufti Barakatullah, now that you're here, we just want to ask you a question regarding Al Rayan Bank. Yeah. So, what is it that makes their home purchase mortgage permissible? And what is it that you need to be as an advisor, because you have a role as, you're not the bank, you're the advisor to the bank. Yeah. What is it that you are being assured by banks like Al Rayan in basically signing and saying that I am quite happy for a bank like this to go and issue home purchase plans, Islamic home purchase plans? What is that? What's the root of it?
I mean, because there are so many steps and so many different relationship is created through Islamic home finance. We have to see that the transaction does not violate any Sharia rule, and it fulfills the market oriented or market or consumers, whatever they need in this field. So what we make sure that it is a musharaka mutanaqisa, and then we make sure that the terms of reference and rental things are fair and compliant, and that there are no derogatory or penalty clauses which are unfair. I mean, these are the three. First of all, the musharaka terms and condition, and the rental terms and conditions, and that there is no other conditions which are, and that all the, of course it fulfills the requirement and nobody is dealt with unfairly. These are the few things here.
So you mentioned a particular system that they have with musharaka.
Yeah.
So I know there are a few, like ijara and so on. I mean, just for the benefit of our audience, because these are terms that are used by even financial advisors, okay? When Muslims generally tend to approach some of these institutes. Could I just get one of you just to give us a brief lowdown very quickly of what those three forms are? Mufti Zubair, maybe you might be the right person here. Just give us a lowdown about this. I think there's about three. So if you could just give us a bit of a lowdown about what they are, so that the people that are listening have a bit of an understanding. I know I'm trying to avoid getting too technical, but I think there's a certain amount of knowledge I think we need to bring to the forefront. Mufti Zubair,
Okay.
you
I think the first thing I would say is, yes. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Can you hear me? Yeah, the first thing I would say, when it comes to home financing and home purchase plans, the bank does not give a loan. Okay, let's get that straight first. There is no loan involved. There is no lending whatsoever involved. Okay, so it's not a loan. Different to conventional banking where they give a loan, an Islamic bank will not give a loan. Okay, currently in the UK, predominantly two types of home purchase plans that are in vogue. One is the ijara one, and one is the shirkat mutanaqisa one. Ijara simply means lease. So for the tenure of the the home purchase period, say for example 25 years, the bank will lease the property to you, and which over 25 years, and it'll calculate how much rent it needs to charge you to ensure that it gets its capital back, plus it gets how much profit it needs to make, and then from possibly a nominal sum at the end, it will sell the house to you for a nominal sum. The other way is that the bank it doesn't lend you any money. Now the second one is where shirkat mutanaqisa is where the bank jointly enters into a contract with you to own a property first. So the bank and you both buy the property. Generally, you give 20%. You have owned 20%. The bank owns 80%, and you will live in the property. So the 80% of the house that is owned by the bank, you will pay rent for, and slowly we'll buy portions of the house back from the bank, and that's what the shirkat mutanaqisa is, where the share of the banks continues to decrease and your share continues to increase. Again, there is no lending over here. Okay, so these there are certain requirements to ensure that these are done in a manner that's Sharia compliant. In themselves, an ijara contract is simply a lease contract, and the shirkat mutanaqisa is simply a musharaka. It's just a joint ownership contract. So so in themselves, they are both tools of Islamic finance for different purposes. But when they come together, there are just certain conditions that you have to ensure that are fulfilled, etc., and that the conditions in the contracts that you sign with the bank are not. There's nothing in there that they're not Sharia compliant.
So
fundamentally, there is no lending.
So just to get the mind right. So for our audience in particular, because we're avoiding the technical sort of discussion here, and that is that in essence, we're not talking about loan. It's not actually a loan where the bank's actually giving you a loan, but rather what it is in most cases it's a rental. The bank and you, and in certain processes, what you're doing is you're purchasing a property together, maybe. So the bank and you as partners. And then what's actually happening is there's a rental system in place. And then slowly, gradually, what will end up happening is the property would become the clients. And that's the sort of general gist of it. So on that basis, are there not certain stipulated conditions about ownership? So if you're an owner, then there are certain conditions that allow you the freedom in certain instances. But do we not bind people down in some of these systems that we have, where you would argue the case and say that's not what we would consider as typical ownership of a bank? So for example, does the bank commit itself to becoming a true owner or part share owner in some of these? These are some of the arguments that usually get presented in those contractual agreements. Or is it on the surface, it just is stated as such, but reality is when you look at the details of the contract, it's the customer who's binding themselves more of with the commitments of an owner rather than the bank itself. I mean, I'm going to open that to anybody. This is a common question that arises. I get it quite a few times as well. Mufti Barakatulla,
this question arises because nobody has seen the title deeds. Okay. I have copies of title deeds and I audit them every year. So I have seen the bank's name are actually really put on the title deeds. So, I mean, people are used to talk just in the thin air. Yeah.
Right.
And without knowledge, talking is our fashion. Yeah. Yes. So if they ask only the experts and like Mufti Zubair and Mufti Faraz Adam and others who have seen many things and who are aware of it, and if they need any other proof, they can see. And there are like non-Sharia scholar experts. There is a website called Islamic Finance Guru. They are more expert than myself, I think. And they explain, they are Oxford graduates. They explain it in a perfectly financial terms and everything. And all the preoccupation and all the reservations are addressed to. But if some people are skeptics, they have right to be skeptics, and there are skeptics about.
I mean, some of these skeptics are ulama.
Yeah.
You know, they're people who have a very deep understanding of the subject as well. So okay.
Ulama maybe because they are not party to all the different contexts, or they have different positions. Okay. So because different ulama can have different positions, right. One fatwa cannot negate other fatwa. It is just the independent fatwa. Each fatwa is independent fatwa. So whoever listens to whoever is interested mufti, they should go ahead. And those who end up with the harshest mufti, it is tough luck to them.
Okay, so we're just going to bring Mufti Faraz into the discussion.
Okay, can I just add? Whilst Mufti Barakatulla is actually maybe say an employee of Al Rayan Bank, I am not. Okay.
Yeah.
And I spent a year and a half. Mufti Barakatulla may not even know this. I spent a year and a half going over the documents and speaking to the in-house Sharia advisor. And back and forth, we had a lot of communication, questions all I had, and eventually I came to the conclusion that I raised some objections. In the next edition, this was reassured that we put correct, and although the intention was different, the wording suggested something else. And I think either February last year, I think the new terms and conditions came out for Al Rayan Bank. I think 2020, something January, February. So from my perspective, having looked at it for a year and a half, and like I said, it is legal. Legal language, and going through all the documentation, my conclusion was that yes, this is something that is Sharia compliant. And I understand, I think Mufti Faraz before me has also said that this is Sharia compliant.
Okay, well, that's interesting. Though I don't really want to name any particular banks in our discussion in particular, because I think that there is a disproportionate element to that. So, Mufti Faraz, this is another typical question that we normally get from individuals, and I know your expert area is zakat. So when we have loans, or when we take out loans or mortgages in this sense, how does zakat play into that? You know, because number one, we got to say, I mean, we could probably look at it in terms of somebody in some element of hardship having to pay up. I know it's not a loan, but they have certain deficits that they have to pay for. Yeah. even I suppose if somebody was in a situation where they're in so much amount of money they have to pay over the year, and they can hardly afford it, in those kind of situations, does zakat come into this? Is this something that we should completely separate from zakat? Is there any scope for that? How does it work?
Sure. So, I mean, in an Islamic mortgage or in a home purchase plan has been discussed, right? Especially with the common ones that we have today. They are based on the shirk naqisa, the diminishing musharaka product, and there's acquisition payments being made on a monthly basis. So there's a sales element and a rental element. Now, all the scholars will tell you here that to deduct the future rentals, right? So a person who's working out his zakat, he cannot deduct his future rentals that he owes, right? To calculate whether he is zakat eligible or not, right? Yes, the debt that he has now, if there's a debt that he has to, if it's a rent that he has to pay now, that would be deductible, of course, right? Which is in arrears or it's outstanding, that's deductible. Then there's the acquisition payments themselves. Again, those are just sale transactions. So the future sale transactions.
Just explain what acquisition payments. I'm just being conscious of the fact that might not understand.
Every month, if a person has a home purchase plan with one of these high street Islamic banks, every month he'll be making one payment, but that payment is composed of two elements. One is your rental, because you're leasing the share of the bank, right? That's how they make a return on their share. Secondly, you're also buying out the equity slowly, outright across 25 years. So these two payments or these two elements are composed in one payment of yours. So the scholars, when they're looking at it in terms of a zakat perspective, they're looking at two things. Now, are these debts or are these transactions, right? What are they? If it's a debt which has been incurred, then from a zakat perspective, they scope to deduct that. But if it's a future transaction, ongoing transactions, so you can't deduct something which you're going to buy in, next month or the month after, right? Those transactions haven't taken place. But then there's a wider discussion, I think, which needs to take place is on the nature of these long-term debt deductions, right? My personal kind of inclination and something I'm writing on right now is, most of the time we receive the advice of deducting 1 year's worth of debts, right? I find that to be very, just personally speaking, is very problematic because many people, when you deduct all your debts, okay, we live in a debt-based economy. That's the reality. So from your house to your car to your appliances, everything's debt financed. So when you deduct all of 1 year's debt, right, you're probably in 8,000, 10,000 pounds worth of debt. And when you sum that up, you're literally left with it minus or you're below the nisab generally.
Yes.
So what happens is over the long term, when you have an economy or a society, you're not paying zakat at all, right? Yes. So this position, why did the scholars classically say the deduction of debt? It was because it can lead to punitive difficulties, punitive measures against you, right? It can impact you. But today, you'll only be impacted if your current month's debt is not paid, not if your 8 months debt down the line is not paid, right? Secondly speaking, the scholars discuss this idea of debt is a form, if you have money which is engaged with a debt, that money is as if it doesn't exist because it's ma'doon bil hawaij asliya, right? That's what they mention. But the money I've gained now for this month will pay this month's debt. It's not going to pay my debt which is owed after 5 months, right? So these are some considerations I think definitely have to be taken into place when speaking about zakah and debts long term, especially the 12 months kind of deduction. I feel it just needs more thought and more research.
It's a quite complex. Mufti Abdullah Nana, did you want to add to this?
Yes. So just to add to this, number one is to add to what Mufti Faraz has mentioned. Here in the United States of America, we do have a number of different Islamic finance options, and I think they're more than. To be fair, I think they're more than the UK. So Murabaha is also discussed, installment sales, diminishing partnership, as was pointed out, and we have ijara as well, right? So depending on the different model of Islamic financing, that will also impact zakat as well. So just to make it very clear, for example, Murabaha would be installment sale that the bank owns the property and the home financing company owns the property and sells it to the individual on an installment basis, of course, with the profit. Now, in that case, there is a debt that's involved. And because we buy something from the store, and if you buy an installment sales, we have to pay that back over time. So as a result, at least for that model, there will be the discussion on calculating your zakat. You have to pay back that amount over time, for example, over 20 or 30 years. And just to make mention this as well, mashallah, Mufti Zubair Butt has written an excellent article on this for Al-Qalam Islamic Advisory Services, which he's discussed long-term debt versus short-term debt. And from our fiqh, our Hanafi fiqh literature, there is that discussion on mahr mu'ajjal and mahr mu'ajjal, right? So to recognize classically in Islamic law, there was always, if a person could not pay them an entire amount of mahr right up front at the time of the wedding, there was a portion that was to be payable now. There was a portion that was deferred. And looking at that legal precedent or maqis alayh, Mufti Zubair has presented solid research that we consider the first year of payments only. Of course, there are multiple opinions, as Mufti Faraz is also pointing out. But just on the other side, I would like to mention Mufti Zubair Butt's research. I'm speaking on his behalf, but I've gone through his research paper, the references, and his research. So it is worth mentioning that here as well. Of course, every person should go to their local mufti, and they can consult with their local mufti with regards to long-term debt versus short-term debt.
Okay. One thing we don't want to promote on this webinar are any particular financial institutes by name. So I'm deliberately trying to avoid that. But generally speaking, I'm trying to address some of these questions. I know we were sort of limited in time. So there's a couple of questions that we have. Some of the questions are related to also going further into the detail of using conventional mortgages. So those kind of questions are arising. Some of the questions related to that are looking at the greater maslaha or the mafsada. And what that basically means is the public interest of the Muslims. So in terms of, and we just did a brief discussion on that. I think the complexity of that is such that you will find that some scholars would accept that, and they would therefore allow you to take out conventional mortgages from banks, which Mufti Zubair has already indicated. But there are other scholars like Mufti Zubair and many others who would also disagree with that because it hasn't reached the level of necessity for us, as well as the fact that we have other halal alternatives, like Mufti Abdullah Nana has mentioned. Then we have Islamic mortgages or Islamic sort of purchase, home purchase plans that exist in some of those Islamic institutes, the financial institutes in the UK, as well as in America and maybe other places around the world. So these are your potential options. I'm trying to address in very clear brevity some of those questions that you're asking. Now, I just want to also put forward a couple of questions in relation to certain things that do arise in some of those contractual agreements. And one of them are complexities, for example, like home insurance. So there is an expectation that you take out a home insurance as part of your agreement with some of these Islamic financial. Now, I'm giving home insurance as one example. There are certain one or two other concepts. Is that something, I'll briefly mention, bring Mufti Barakatulla into this in particular. Is that something that we can overlook, or do we deal with that in a certain way? As you, as an advisor of a bank, how would you deal with that issue? Is that something that's acceptable?
I mean, I deal it with as a part of a regulatory requirement, because initially Islamic home finance were not regulated by the government bodies, but later on they became among the regulated products. Regulated products mean when government makes sure that nobody is to suffer any unprecedented loss or something.
Right.
So it's like driving a motor car.
Yes.
You are free not to take insurance, but you have to take unlimited liability, yeah,
right,
and face up jail. And similarly for mortgage, because it is so huge debt and so huge responsibility, and so many other people and other people's money is involved, that government regulated mortgages, it is necessary to have insurance. Yeah? So that insurance in the beginning, like last decade, there was a takaful available, but takaful mean home insurance based on Sharia compliant measures, but that has been withdrawn because of whatever reason, political other reasons. So like insurance of driving a car, the insurance for the home finance is a regulatory requirement. So it's unnecessary question, or maybe people do not know that it's a regulatory requirement.
Okay, so in essence, because of the sense of liability and there not being any other options to address that liability,
yeah,
then for those cases there is some scope.
As soon as there will be Islamic insurance available in UK, many Islamic insurance companies and the kafil companies have collapsed because of the lack of whatever finances or demand or whatever, we don't know the market situation here.
Okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up the panel to the audience, and before I do that, so if anybody in the audience would like to say, and please do ask a question that we've not already addressed. So I would prefer that you do that. Like I said, limited time, so we really want some really fruitful questions, okay, inshallah. So we have already answered some of those questions already, so please do only ask those questions that really have not been addressed yet. So just before we move on, we're in a very sort of dire situation, and we know that there are many businesses are suffering at the moment because of COVID, coronavirus. And some of these businesses are in a dire situation in the sense that they are not able to sustain their business or maintain it in the way that they can. Now, we've got lockdowns like in the UK and many other places around the world, and that is clearly going to have a massive financial impact on somebody's regular core income. Mufti Zubair, you in particular, because I know you've written about this, we have certain loans or that are available by certain governments that are allowing some of these businesses, or there are certain financial packages in other countries that are provided by banks, which are, in essence, they may be coupled with interest or they may not be coupled with interest. Now, from that perspective, what is the scope from the Sharia perspective in terms of your business being in this dire situation and looking at all the options? From your understanding, clearly you've looked at the concept of dhurura and you've also looked at the concept of alternative halal options, and you're going to look at it solely from the UK perspective and from that lens. What's your take on that issue?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Initially, when COVID started, people thought this was just a pandemic to do with health. Yeah. But quite, soon realized that actually it's not just about health, it's about the way we live and, financial security and everything. With regards to the government loan, there are some grants that are available. Government gives some, handouts as well. But on the whole, they tend to be insufficient for a person to be able to run the business at all or even properly. And there is a government loan scheme available where the government takes up for the first 12 months. The government says, okay, we will pay the interest. You take the loan, we'll pay the interest for the first 12 months. If you pay back within the first 12 months, then okay, there'll be no interest on it. How much you take, that's how much you give back. And beyond 12 months, you have to start paying the interest. There's this question, several Muslim businessmen have approached me with this question, and my position has been that if you are unable to secure any finance from any other halal option, you can't borrow from friends and family, etc., whatever, or you can't raise money in a halal option, and it's difficult to raise money in this time where everybody's suffering. Everybody's suffering, so everybody's short of money. So at the particular time, if it's difficult for you to raise finance in any other way, and by not availing of this loan, you will suffer significant harm. Now, for every individual, that is a very personal thing, how much they can survive and how much they cannot. And then it is permitted, or it is hoped that if you take the loan with the intention of paying back within 12 months, then that is something that there should be dispensation for. If you are and then you try to pay within 12 months. If you are not able to pay within 12 months, it is hoped that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will overlook this. But this should be for your survival. It shouldn't be for if you want to expand or grow your business. It's something that is essential for you to survive and or avert significant harm. Then okay, it's permitted. Otherwise, no.
So clearly, the idea there is, in principle, that you need to recognize, and I suppose people do this themselves, don't they? They recognize how much of a harm there is to their own, and that can be quite subjective. So people have to make a kind of a decision that this is my bread and butter, and it's going to be heavily impacted. It's going to impact the wealth in my home, in terms of my, the loans that I have, purchase plans that I have, or even, for my children and so forth. So you have to look at it from that sort of perspective, and then the survival of your particular business. And then on that basis, there is some scope, taking into consideration that as long as some of these loans that have no interest for the first sort of 12 months, that you need to sort of build your manage it in such a way that you are able to give back within those 12 months, so you don't end up in a system of interest. Okay, inshallah.
In the Hanafi school, you do have the position يجوز الاستقراض بالربح يجوز للمحتاج الاستقراض بالربح. That for somebody who is needy, it is permissible for that person to take a loan with riba, if that it comes down to it.
Mufti Abdullah Nana, you've talked about some of these sort of financial loan institutes in the US, for example. Is the situation quite different there? How are people dealing with COVID there who are financially broke, or they're in a system where like we just talked about earlier with Mufti Zubair? What's the system? How does it work there?
Yeah. So we had a similar model available. So roughly, since COVID started, roughly somewhere around April or May, the government did offer small business loans to many individuals, and some of them were interest-free, and some of them also if you met certain requirements, you did not have to pay the amount back. Right? It was more as a gift or financial support for many institutions. So as of now, here in the United States, we don't have a second set yet, but our first set was roughly around, we're talking about April, May, June. There were a number of small business loans and even large business loans offered, and some of them were interest-free, and some of them were also just gifts to businesses. As of now, we've had as of right now, there has been a discussion to offer individuals financial support or financial checks if they meet certain requirements, but I have not seen a second round of loans offered to businesses as of now. Right? What happened was roughly around April or May, about close to about a year ago.
Okay, so let me just get Faraz, Adam in one last final question that I will ask anyway, and then inshallah what we'll do is we've got 1 or 2, 3 people, 4 people who got their hands up, so inshallah we'll bring them on. So keep your hands up inshallah, and then we'll bring you on, and then we'll leave the rest of the time for you all. Mufti Faraz, because I know this might not come into the conversation, and maybe it's got nothing to do with this particular conversation, but cryptocurrency is becoming a very popular thing at the moment. In that sense, how would the discussions around cryptocurrency, can you see, encroaching on the issue of home finance and also issues related to loans and people using that sort of means to make up for loans? How would you see that being an issue from an Islamic Sharia perspective in this? Or is there no issue with it?
No, so with regards to crypto assets, as scholars probably are aware here, there's multitude of views, right? We've got a full spectrum. Those Darul-Iftars and scholars are of the view that it's not permissible altogether. Right. On the other side of the spectrum, there are scholars who are saying it is permissible, given there's a certain screening done. Then you have those scholars in the middle, like some seniors who are doing tawaqquf and just saying no comment right now because they're just waiting for the regulations and for the whole development of this, you could say, this technology. So that's really the spectrum when it comes to crypto assets. And there's so many different types of crypto assets. You can't give a blanket ruling on all of them, yes. Right? They come in all shapes and sizes. Yeah. But for those who potentially are of the view that these are digital assets, like the Securities Commission of Malaysia, given the kind of Sharia guidance, there's Sharia boards in the GCC who have also gone that particular way. They recognize these digital assets. And now also the Dubai government and regulators are working on regulations to develop the crypto asset kind of framework. For them, they would potentially look at, if it's a loan, if you can use these crypto assets as loans, then the same principles of riba will apply. It has to be at par kind of trading. And it wouldn't be all crypto assets, because as I said, some crypto assets are created purely as a medium of exchange, to serve as a medium of exchange in a specific network. That's it. Within a closed network and closed circuit, it serves as a medium of exchange. Other crypto assets give utility. So you can get access to certain services, so on and so forth. So even if we were to use some kind of decentralized or DeFi, decentralized finance model, right? The same principles are applied to legacy-based systems that we have in place right now. The same principles will apply to the DeFi space without any kind of difference. So lending, the shape, we would potentially see the same structures. We'd see murabaha, we'd see, your ijara schemes and everything. But what's being used is a different medium to make those payments. That's the essence. I think the greater conversation is not about the crypto, rather the smart contracts are in place. Okay. So what we've seen in the last year is we've seen sukuk, being launched on a blockchain, right? The sukuk being these Islamic capital market instruments, which are there to raise finance, right, for large projects. So we've seen blockchain being used in smart contracts, you could say, wired to do the whole process of a sukuk issuance. That's where really I think the growth is coming. And I would say finally, after the global financial crisis in 2008, and this is why it comes back to all these banks. Why is it that, you know, Islamic banks, people make the argument that, you know, Islamic banks are too expensive, right? One of the considerations, because after the global financial crisis in 2008, banks have had to increase their regulations, they've had to tighten up. And that's created a whole movement known as alternative finance. That's why we're seeing so many platforms now, which are offering SME financing, right? So you're finding many different platforms in the UK and overseas offering financing schemes and financing mechanisms. So I think we're seeing a decentralization of the economy overall when it comes to financing, because Islamic banks can't keep up due to the regulations. So now we're seeing alternative providers providing Sharia compliant financing. And it's really interesting. I think we have a very interesting decade coming forward, where we'll see a number of different Sharia compliant players in the market, inshallah, giving the customers and people more choice and inshallah more competitive rates at the end of the day.
Yeah, I never really looked at it from that perspective. It's a really interesting account of what could possibly come. Okay, I'm going to open up to the audience, inshallah. So let's start off with Jamshed. If you can put your question forward, inshallah. So, Jamshed? No. Okay, we'll move on.
Hello. Hello.
Hello. Yeah, Jamshed. Yeah.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.
Question was just about whether home insurance was allowed, because so that's my question was.
I think we've already answered that question. So inshallah, we'll move on. Inshallah. Okay.
Thank you.
Fawzi, I think we have Fawzi. Apologize if I'm not saying your name properly. Inshallah.
Yes, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Brothers, first of all, I'd like to thank you so much. Thank you for this opportunity and this Zoom. Jazakumullahu khair fi mizan hasanatikum. I'm resident in Ireland now, maybe 20 years, and I pay rent for the last 20 years. So annually, maybe 14,000. So in the last 20 years, I paid around 280,000 rent. I'm trying to avoid the mortgage because I'm feeling not happy with that, even though there is a big fatwa here in Ireland that is okay. Now my question is, we have around 75,000 person as a Muslim community, and there is no Islamic financial institute here in Ireland. So my question is, for example, for the Al Rayyan Bank, is there possibility to cover some applications from Ireland? Is there any opportunity to give us and to support the Muslim community who are looking really for following this product? Jazakumullah khair, and I'm really happy for
okay.
this webinar.
Just as a disclaimer, we don't want to promote any particular financial institute on this webinar. So sure. I'm going to move away from the name that's been mentioned. So this is quite an important discussion. Let me just frame it another way, which is quite important. In Ireland, they do not have, according to this person, they do not have any Islamic options in terms of home purchase plans and possibly also loans. What is the situation there? What is the situation? So how would, I mean, we recognize that there's this situation that you can at least rent. But what if your rental comes to a significant amount, much more so than it would if you mortgaged property? In that situation, because that is another very clear issue that arises in some of these places, where the actual rental, if you rent accommodation, the rental amount is much more significant compared to actually just mortgaging from conventional banks. Mufti Zubair, let's bring you in. What are your thoughts regarding those kind of individuals who live in those kind of countries?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I have had numerous inquiries from Ireland, mainly doctors, professionals that are in this position. Again, I raised the question, what the dispensation for or the argument for dispensation for conventional mortgage, what is it? it is to cover our head. It is not to ensure we get the best possible sort of financial outcome. And so therefore, unfortunately, if you live in Ireland, my position would be that Islamic mortgage, conventional mortgage is not an option. You would have to rent or come to England if you can. Secondly, I would say, although I don't want to make this mention any particular bank, but maybe Mufti Barakatulla can sort of persuade where he has some kind of influence for them to spread their wings a little and help our brothers in Ireland. That's all I can say.
Okay, that's fine. Let's move on to Abu Yusuf. We can't give detailed responses. We'll try to give very simple responses. I'm trying to get as many as you to ask questions, inshallah, and then we'll have to close up, inshallah, towards the end. So, Abu Yusuf.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah.
Jazakallah khair for this opportunity. Just in brief, based on the darura, this question ideally for Mufti Zubair Bhat Sahib, since he's mentioned about darura and what would we classify as darura then? Can we say for the betterment of the deen of our children, betterment of location in terms of where we live, accessibility to schools, the environment, mahol, will we take all of that into consideration, to deem it to be darura in order to take conventional mortgage, as the Islamic mortgages tend to be a lot more expensive, and taking a mortgage in many times is cheaper than just renting out.
Let me just phrase that a bit differently. Mufti Zubair, to all of you, in essence, right? Now, okay, we recognize darura, but we also recognize hajatul am. So let's say, for example, we're in a situation where there are hardship for a number of people, Muslims, within a particular locality or even countrywide. Is there some kind of, this is not a fatwa, okay? So don't take it as a fatwa. But is there any scope for us to look at the concept of maslaha in this issue? I know this issue does also arise on the issues. I really don't want to provoke another discussion on university loans and things like that as well. But is there some kind of scope? Is this something where we might require a number of ulama to come together and have a bigger discussion? Not necessarily in places like UK where there are those options, but in places where those options don't always exist, about looking the overall damage, because this can have implications in terms of, and this brother is correct, on issues such as, depending on the system and the way the economic system works in those countries and what privileges they have in terms of health services and so forth, but potential, private education, where people can't afford because they're so fundamentally focused around paying off their rent, which is quite high, as opposed to a mortgage system, which becomes an asset for their children in the next generation, not necessarily maybe too much in their generation. So overall, cumulatively, you may find that there is actual harm, inevitable harm that may arise. Is there any scope for maslah? Is this something that could potentially be an open arena for discussion for ulama to come to? Or is this something that we shouldn't even be bothered about, because it's quite clear? The response to that is there is none. There is no issue of maslaha here. Open to any of the panelists. Anybody wants to add to that?
Yeah, why we are ignoring the European Council of Fatwa based in Ireland?
Right.
It is a pan-European body with 30 scholars and more prominent in Arab world in here, and who have lived long. Yes. So that body in 2003 or 4 issued a fatwa that in the absence of Sharia compliant home finance, zaruratan al-hajatu tunaddul manzalat al-zarura, mean the whatever individual needs becomes like a necessity, and individual needs becomes like a communal responsibility, a communal necessity. They have given a fatwa, and it has been on the market for last like 15 years. Yeah, and we just think, and they had an extensive discussion about the exactly topic, Dr. Sahab, you are raising, and they have extensive papers, and so they have concluded by the majority, not 100% agreement, that in the absence of Sharia compliant home finance, in the process of unavailability for whatever reasons, or unaffordability of the Islamic home finance, people can resort to the conventional mortgage as just one for their home. That's it.
Okay, that's a good point, because if people have sat down and done this already, and there is clearly certain fatwa that state that, then those people who feel confident in that, then inshallah they should make reference to those things as well.
Dr. Can we just say that the European Council Fatwa and Research Fatwa was discussed in the beginning of today's discussion, and it was acknowledged that this does exist. However, in truth, that is really the fatwa of Yusuf al-Shaykh Yusuf al-Qaradawi, which has been attested by others, and it also has been refuted as well, quite in detail. But if somebody takes that position, and in doing so in the hereafter, inshallah, there will be no question for them, inshallah.
Yeah, sorry, I wasn't there in the beginning, so I didn't hear. Sorry.
Okay. Now, can I just ask one more individual, Shahid? I think M. Shahid, and maybe Mohammed Shahid. I think if you can come bring forward your question.
Can you hear me now? Yeah.
We can hear you, inshallah.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone.
Wa alaikum salam.
Just a very general question. Not home purchase plan, but purchase plan in general. So I'm talking about high street retailers. For example, if I want to buy a fridge, you can purchase it on almost like an installment basis. And if you ask me if it involves any interest, I wouldn't know, because they do not deal with Islamic bank. On the background, they deal with general banks. So my question is basically, is that allowed or is that not allowed?
Okay, open to any of the panelists there. It's a wider question.
Mufti Faraz, would you like to answer?
Yeah, I mean, if it's an interest-free financing, then it's not an issue. Right? If there's interest involved in that financing, then it would be a problem.
Okay, so that's a very simple response to that, really.
I mean, generally, for the car finance nowadays, alhamdulillah, among the durable goods car finance, I have checked it last Sunday. There are many interest-free and installment or rental basis available. Yeah, and many zero. As far as the APR is zero, then it shouldn't have posed any problem. Inshallah.
Okay, inshallah, what we'll do is we'll have one more last question, and I think we might have to close it at that point, inshallah. So please, I'm going to open this to Tamim Tariq, Mohammed. Okay, so if you put your question forward, and please make it a question that's not been addressed already, inshallah.
Assalamu alaikum. Can you hear?
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah.
So I'm a student of Iftar from France, and I'm asking a question here. In France, we have, alhamdulillah, murabaha, which is established, and I bought on murabaha, and one of the main questions that I had, and it was not really answered correctly, it was the risk between myself and the bank. And I went through, mashallah, and what I feel is the risk is not completely properly shared as 50-50. Like if I were to die, then it's not like everything is done. In the end, the murabaha should be on the head of my wife and my family and so on. I feel like, okay, it seems though, mashallah, compatible, but risk-wise, it's not fair, I feel. What do you think about that?
Yeah, so this is a quite important question, and it's a question that is addressed by quite a lot of people who have a very deep understanding on the subject, and that is the question of risk sharing between the lender as well as the customer. So even though we may be talking in terms of contractual agreements where we have ownership shared, but that risk sharing does not identify itself with that concept of sharing ownership. Mufti Abdullah Nana, I'm going to bring you in because we've not had you for a while. What are your thoughts about that?
Yes. So first of all, it's important to differentiate between the different models.
Yeah.
The risk sharing arrangement will be different according if there's a diminishing partnership, or there's a murabaha installment sale, or there's a ijara contract. So the brother's question was specifically with regard to murabaha. And understanding the nature of the murabaha transaction is initially the Muslim Islamic financing company will own the house, and they will assume all the risk involved with that house.
Yes.
As Mufti Qasmi has mentioned, the requirement is even for a short period of time, the bank has to own that house, and assume all risks associated with owning that house. Thereafter, they will sell that house to, how the murabaha works, on an installment basis and installment sales. They will sell that house to the individual. Once that transaction is done, the ownership will transfer over entirely to the customer. And now over that 30-year time period, the customer will now be responsible for paying back that amount. So the risk will not be the same, just by definition, because it's an installment sale, and that customer now has assumed the risk, and now will be paying back that amount of money during his lifetime, and ensure that it will be a loan outstanding. So the risk factor there really is it's not comparable. Yes, the question may come up in a diminishing partnership model. There, at the same time, there's co-owners, right? The co-owners exist, the customer and the Islamic home financing company. So there the issue of risk is more of a question. How is the risk being distributed? How are the obligations being distributed equally between the two parties?
Mufti Barakatulla, you're somebody who deals with this to some degree, in terms of even some of the, as a Sharia advisor to some of these financial institutes. Does that ever arise with you in terms of the things that you come across, in terms of risk sharing? And how it's dealt with?
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. I mean, Muslims have really some of the general knowledge that in every deal, everybody has to share risk. This is not a universal principle. So sometimes risk is shared when it is a type of transaction, but many times the risks are not shared. So we should demystify that always risks are not always to be shared, and parties have to take their own responsibilities. It doesn't matter that the financing institutions are big and individuals are vulnerable, so only big parties always take all the risks or share the risk. So this is one should really make it clear, as Mufti Abdullah Nana has said, that not all time, always, all the transactions. Whenever we buy something and take delivery of things, we are taking risk, and of course it is protected by the government law of up to 30 days, but after 30 days there is no responsibility, no recourse, So it is a mythology that Islam promotes always in all the transaction risk sharing. So even in Murabaha, there is no risk sharing. Murabaha by nature is a liability transaction. Musharaka in a business model is a risk sharing, but musharaka in a Shirkatul Mulk model, there is no risk sharing. There is no requirement for risk sharing. So it is just some romantic ideas from the general public and assumptions which takes this issue. Otherwise, if they are sincere and if they know if there is a fairness, because the customer, if I can put it other way around, no customer want to share the increase in their equity of the home. The market will vanish from the Islamic finance, because so they have given up sharing of the gain, so that they do not need to share the losses. Even in Musharaka Mutanafisa, it's just one-sided discussion is going on. The customers will ask, have a survey. No, 99% people will say, we don't want to share all the equity gain over 20 years with the financing institutions. Nobody wants to do that. That's not the market at the moment.
So it's a question of practicality in terms of the liabilities that the partners would have. Okay, inshallah. Now,
Doctor, can I just say, even Shirk Mutanakisa, the bank does share liability, but that is protected through insurance. That's all it is. Liability is shared, but it's protected through insurance. So effectively, the bank is secure.
Okay, sure. Okay, so first of all, I would just like to thank all our panelists. Our time's over, and we've gone over by quite a bit. So inshallah, I'd like to thank all our panelists, alhamdulillah, for their time. They've taken their precious time out to advise us all on some of these really important issues on Islamic mortgages and loans and so forth. Now, I recognize there are many questions which are important and we clearly value them. There are some questions that are very specific, so we can't really always address the specific questions because everybody's circumstances are very different. Now, just as a disclaimer, I think it's very, very important that you all turn, because you see that there is some element of differences of opinion that do exist there. There are certain Sharia councils who have actually made and passed certain fatwa on certain issues. So my response to that would be that you need to turn to those individuals that you feel that there is an element of trust, in the sense that you feel that they're adil, they're upright, be they individuals or a particular organization, and also that they have the deep and depth of the knowledge related to the Sharia as well as the Islamic banking system and finance. So those kind of individuals are those kind of people that you need to turn to and gain that advice. We have our scholars here, alhamdulillah, who will also be playing a very, very important role in our Islamic finance course, which we have been delivering and we are continuing delivering, which is already going to start and is going to be initiated very soon. So these are some of our scholars who will be talking and will be some of the instructors on those courses, who will be presenting some of the different topics related to these areas. For those of you who have not had your questions addressed, or you have a personal interest in this area, then I highly recommend that you join that course. It's a very valuable course. There's a lot of information there, and you will have your own personal opportunity to talk to our panelists individually as instructors on those particular courses, inshallah. So I'm sorry that I could not address all your questions. I know there's loads of questions, loads of people still raising their hands, but because we ran out of time, I will have to finish there, inshallah. We'll know that this is a very important area, and clearly there are a number of different things that people would like to ask. We try to cover the surface of this just to give you, as they say, tantalize the taste buds, so that inshallah you start realizing that there is a lot more complexity to this. There is a lot more technicality, and the Mufti Akram will tell us that there's a lot more technical sort of elements to this, and hopefully, inshallah, those can be broken down for you to understand them, inshallah, on our course for those of you who decide to join. So inshallah, we leave at that point. Jazakumullah khair for all our panelists, inshallah, and also for our audience and those of you who have taken out your time to watch this webinar, inshallah. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless you, and may Allah protect us against all the pandemic and some of the burdens of financial burdens that we're all facing. Inshallah. Subhana rabbika rabbil izzati amma yasifun wa salamun ala al-mursaleen walhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi.